Hello everybody and welcome to Notorious Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm Notorious Cly and this is Too Fast, Too Furious Fusion. This deck list is all about family. Just kidding, it's all about making Borlo Furious Dragon. I love this card. I was so excited when I saw it was going to be a Varus event drop reward, and seeing it finally in Duel Links has really got my gears turning, really got my brain working on how I could build the deck list around it to maximize its abilities. It has a great effect and cool artwork, and it gets to fit right in with the Rokket engine, so it's everything I love right now. As mentioned earlier, I want to do these deck profiles with a little bit of structure, so let's move on to the introduction. As I just mentioned, this deck is centered around Borlo Furious Dragon and attempting to make it at all costs and then maximize its effect. Borlo Furious Dragon's effect is at quick effect speed. You can target one monster you control and one card your opponent controls, destroy them both. This may seem a little bad when you consider that big boss fusion monsters are usually the only card you control on your side of the field, but with the spam ability and ease that the Rokket engine has to get materials on board, this effect becomes really great, especially when you're using Furious Dragon's effect to pop a Rokket monster. As you know, Rokket monsters, at least the majority of them, when they are destroyed by battle or card effect, will float into another Rokket monster name during the end phase. This means if you manage to make Furious Dragon and have a Rokket monster on your side of the field, you can use Furious Dragon's effect, pop the Rokket monster, destroy one card your opponent controls, and then during the end phase, the Rokket monster will float into another name, leaving Furious Dragon's effect live going into the next turn. That kind of recursion and ability to constantly pick off your opponent's cards while maintaining a 3000 attack beater on board is incredible. It is an interaction I think is worth building around. Let's go over some of the ways that we're attempting to make Furious Dragon. We're attempting to make Furious Dragon, first and foremost, with Rapid Trigger. This is a great card, and it fits perfect with the Rokket engine. We are also using the King of the Swamp engine. This adds a lot of versatility to the deck, in addition to allowing us to search polymerization, which is great for making Borlo Furious Dragon. We are also playing Keeper of the Dragon Magic for a little bit of spice, and we'll cover that in the card by card. Another thing I really love about this deck is the versatility of the extra deck. As with most Rokket engine decks, you are not really limited to what you can get into, and the toolbox expands ever more slightly now that we're adding fusion summoning into the mix. You'll see a lot of the cool things and interactions I discovered while building this list when we go to the card by card. So let's not waste any more time. Let's go to the card by card. First and foremost, we have our Rokket engine. Rockets and Borals go hand in hand, so Furious Dragon and the Rokket engine must also go hand by hand. They're meant to be. We have our 3 copies of Rokket Tracer. Normally with a Rokket engine, I typically advocate for playing 2 copies of Rokket Tracer, but Rokket Tracer is the card we want to normal summon the most in this list, so we're playing 3, so we can see it in our opening hand most often, in addition to having extra names in the deck that hopefully our other Rokket monsters can float into during the end phase if they are destroyed, hopefully by Furious Dragon's effect. We are playing 1 copy of Metal Rokket Dragon, 1 copy of Magna Rokket Dragon, and 1 copy of Silver Rokket Dragon. I'm playing 1 copy of each of these because I want extra names in the deck, in addition to giving me enough volume of monsters. I think 3 is pretty good to potentially see one in my starting hand to use with some of our fusion methods to get Furious Dragon on the field. We're also playing the mandatory 3 copies of Quick Launch. Quick Launch is busted. I keep saying this. This is the card that makes the engine so splashable and gives it a lot of power and upside and versatility. Gotta play 3 of these. For anybody wondering why I'm not doing this deck profile in Duel Links, even though the cards are technically available now, if you watch my pack bowl video, I did not get all of the cards I wanted, and I was having a bit of trouble trying to get Duel Links to let me add cards I didn't own to the deck list. And rather than do reading, that boring thing that none of us like to do, I just went to my favorite online simulator, and we're doing the deck profile here. That's enough of a digression. Let's move on to our next card. Rapid Trigger, I covered this a little bit earlier. Rapid Trigger is a card specifically designed to make Borlo Furious Dragon with the Rokket engine. You can, at quick effect speed, fusion summon 1 fusion monster from your extra deck by destroying fusion materials listed on it from your field. This is great, So if you're using 2 rockets as material, you're destroying them, they're going to float during the end phase. So if you open a way to get 2 rockets on board, whether that be quick launch and tracer, or 2 quick launch, or any one of the various ways that we can spam the board with rockets, using rapid trigger gives you a board load Furious Dragon, and then the float effect of rockets will give you the material to have Furious Dragon pop something other than itself. Love this card. Has a couple of restrictions and also a couple of benefits, and we should probably cover those. The monster you fusion summon with this card can only attack monsters special summoned from the extra deck, but it is also unaffected by the effects of monsters from the extra deck, except its own. It's still affected by its own effects. Next up, we're playing 3 copies of King of the Swamp. This is incredibly versatile in this list. You can send King of the Swamp from your hand to the graveyard to search Polymerization, which is another way to make board load Furious Dragon if you don't happen to draw the rapid trigger. Searching Poly is great. There's some extra shenanigans you can pull with King of the Swamp because it's also a fusion material substitute for any named card on a fusion card. Sorry, got Furious on the brain. Love that guy. I don't know if 3 is the correct number, but for now, I'm going to value the ability to search Poly because we only have 2 copies of Rapid Trigger available to us at the moment, I believe. Please somebody fact check me on that. And with only 2 copies of Rapid Trigger, it may not be as consistent as we like. Again, this deck is centered around making board load Furious Dragon. We need to be able to make board load Furious Dragon. Poly is a key part to that. Following up on that, we also have 2 copies of Poly. Need those for the King of the Swamp search target. And we have Keeper of Dragon Magic. This card is fantastic in this list for multiple reasons. Reason number 1, it's a Dark Dragon. You can use it to make board load Furious Dragon. Board load Furious Dragon only needs 2 Dark Dragon monsters. Keeper of Dragon Magic can be one of them. In addition to that, if this card is normal or special summoned, you can discard 1 card to search 1 Polymerization normal spell, Poly, or 1 fusion normal spell. The intended fusion normal spell we are running to search off of Keeper of Dragon Magic is Neos Fusion. We'll get to that in a second. So Keeper of Dragon Magic is only at 2 because it's a good normal summon, but ideally we'd like to be able to normal summon Tracer. I wouldn't be heartbroken if I had to normal summon Keeper of Dragon Magic over Tracer, just because Keeper of Dragon Magic gives us a lot of flexibility and a lot of searchability in this list. So 2 copies is good. I really want to see this in my hand some of the time. It's also worth noting that Keeper of Dragon Magic has an effect that can bring a named fusion material monster back from your graveyard, but that very rarely comes up. Next up is our Neos Fusion package. We have the alt art of Elemental Hero Neos, because I believe this art is superior to the original. At me, GX fans, I'm ready for it. Just kidding, don't be mean. Be nice to me, please. And then we have 2 copies of Neos Fusion. I'm only running 2 copies here because I don't want to see multiples of these in my hand. Ideally, I only want to see the 1. And I don't need the consistency of 3 because it can be searched by Keeper of Dragon Magic. Neos Fusion has a very interesting synergy with our board load Furious Dragon, because while it is in the graveyard, if a fusion monster that lists Elemental Hero Neos as one of its materials will be destroyed by a battle or card effect, we're specifically worried about the card effect part of that, you can banish Neos Fusion from your graveyard instead. So if you manage to get board load Furious Dragon out on the field with our Neos Fusion target, Elemental Hero Brave Neos, you can banish Neos Fusion when it would be destroyed by board load Furious Dragon's effect, and protect your Brave Neos. You get to use Furious Dragon's effect to destroy 1 card your opponent controls and protect your Neos, keeping 2 big bodies on the board and creating more problems for your opponent to have to deal with. There's also some interesting shenanigans you can do with Neos Fusion, especially when you consider the materials listed on Elemental Hero Neos. Neos wants 1 Elemental Hero Neos and 1 level 4 or lower effect monster. If only there was a level 4 or lower effect monster we could send from our deck to the graveyard that could be counted as any other named card on a fusion card. Where would we find one of those? King of the Swamp is our intended target. And it's our intended target because you can pull off some funny shenanigans with Necro Fusion. Necro Fusion allows you to banish fusion materials to fusion summon, emphasis on fusion summon, one fusion monster from your extra deck. This is great specifically because we do have a lot of control over what we send to the graveyard via Neos Fusion. In addition to that, we can use rockets that were popped with Rapid Trigger to make another Furious Dragon. The possibilities are really endless with Necro Fusion in this list. I don't think this is mandatory to play, but it's way too fun to pass up. I love Necro Fusion shenanigans, and I think this deck does it really well. We'll cover a couple of the funny extra deck targets for Necro Fusion when we get to the extra deck and side deck. Last up, we have Ice Dragon's Prison. This realistically could be any limit 3 card. Neos Fusion is limited to 3. That's another reason why I wanted to only play 2 copies, is to free up that 1 extra spot for a power card. This is the power card. I think it's okay if you don't play it at all and play this list at 23 cards. I'm playing 24 cards for a couple reasons. 1, Garnet. Don't want to see the Garnet, so I'm going to bury it a little bit deeper in the deck with a few more cards. In addition to that, we have a lot of searching and special summoning. We have King of the Swamp, searches Poly. 1 King of the Swamp gets us Poly. We have Keeper of Dragon Magic. Dragon Magic normal summon plus a discard gets us Poly or Neos Fusion. Neos Fusion, dump stuff from the deck so we can fusion and summon. Quick Launch, special summon something from deck. Tracer, special summon something from deck. There are a lot of ways that we can get stuff out of our deck, so I think playing a larger build here is okay. 24 cards is usually right about the point where I start getting a little more uncomfortable adding anything else to the list. Again, I am a person who values consistency above all else, so I'm going to keep it at 24 for right now. This is definitely a list I will be testing. I'm very interested to see how good this list is. I have some realistic expectations for it, but I would love to be proven wrong in the best way. Let's move on to our extra deck now. We have 2 copies of Furious Dragon. This is a Furious Dragon deck. I want to play 2 copies. 1 copy could be good enough, but I like having the second, especially when we're doing Necro Fusion stuff. Rapid Trigger destroys fusion materials, sends them to the grave. Necro Fusion could banish those same fusion materials to get Furious Dragon. So might as well play 2. Next up is 1 copy of Elemental Hero Brave Neos. I think this could technically be at 2 just because of the aforementioned Necro Fusion shenanigans, but I think 1 copy is just enough. We're really just looking for the 1 Brave Fusion to have a target for Neos Fusion, obviously, so we can start sending stuff to the graveyard to turn on Necro Fusion. In addition to that, it's just board presence, just a big dude that can be a little tricky to deal with when Neos Fusion is in the grave. Dark End Dragon. I think I should say at this point now, anything from this point on, I don't believe is mandatory to play in your extra deck. These are just the cards that are kind of too good to pass up for me at this point in time. That's always subject to change as I learn more and play this deck more. So anyways, Dark End Dragon, love it. My favorite Synchro 8. As much as I love the RDAs, Dark End Dragon is the best. Love this dude. This is forever going to be my favorite Duel Links card. Sending to the graveyard is so versatile, it's so powerful, it gets around so much stuff. Love playing it. Notably, it would get around our Neos Fusion restriction. So there you go. See, Dark End Dragon, the homie. Love him. Brute Enforcer. Brute Enforcer is just a good, easy link to get into. It's also dark, which means you're not going to be locked out by Tracer Dragon's effect. Rokket Tracer's effect. In addition to that, it can always pitch a card to the graveyard. If we manage to get a second copy of Neos Fusion stuck in our hand and no way to make a second Brave Neos because we're only playing the 1, it's good discard fodder. In addition to that, if we're playing Necro Fusion, putting stuff in the graveyard might not necessarily be a bad thing. Evil Swarm Nightmare. I really like this one in the list because it's a good going first card, and I think it adds a little bit of something to the list if you can't get to your Furious Dragon or your other extra deck targets. Most of the other rank 4 XCs that we have access to or we really want to be playing are more turn 2 options, so we can go ahead and kill our opponent. Nightmare is there to help us when going first. That is 6 extra deck slots, so we would have 2 extra to play with, and here are some options that you could fill in there. Dark Cavalry. This is a Necro Fusion target. Dark Magician plus 1 Warrior Monster. We have our 1 Warrior Monster that we can send from the deck to the graveyard via Neos Fusion. We also have King of the Swamp, who counts as any named material. Dark Magician. while he's in the hand field or graveyard. Boy, isn't that neat. We also have Millenniumize Restrict. This is a little trickier to make off of Rokket Fusion since we can't just send the materials with Neos Fusion, but with as much synchro summoning, fusion summoning, or destroying we're going to be doing with Rokket Tracer, I don't really think we'll have an issue getting the materials in grave. It could even be a thing that your opponent puts the materials in grave for you during their turn. Then you flip Necro Fusion and flip the duel on its head. And next up is Invoked Kaliga. Same thought as Millenniumize Restrict. A little harder to make since you can't just dump everything right from the deck off Neos Fusion. But again, same logic applies. We should be able to get the material in there eventually. Fernity Doom Dragon. Good Synchro 8 free-to-play option. Love this guy too. So great that it can just destroy stuff and do burn damage. Sometimes that burn damage will cheese out some wins that you weren't going to get otherwise. In addition to that, it's just a 3000 attack body. In simplified game states, that can be enough to win the duel on its own. Hot Red Dragon Archfiend, same thing. Blow up the entire board. Everything in attack position. Make sure your own monsters aren't in attack position. You will destroy them. Sometimes you will forget to play around that. It's just the nature of Hot Red Dragon Archfiend. We also have our XYZ toolbox. Dark Rebellion XYZ Dragon. You've seen this in a bunch of lists already. Just a good kill option. Also kind of neat in this list that it dumps 2 materials to activate its effect, which could turn on Necro Fusion. But play what you want. If you have it, great. I don't think it's mandatory at all. Just a good option to help kill your opponent. Same thing with Malevolent Sin. This is a dueling staple for a reason. Malevolent Sin wins games. There's really not much else to say about it. Roach is another going first option. It's not as good as Evil Swarm Nightmare because Nightmare can flip down any special summon monster as long as it has the capability to be flipped down. Looking at you, Lynx, Roach is a little tricky to use since it's only inherent summons and they have to be level 5 or higher. Roach notably does nothing against XZs or Blink decks, so it's an option I would consider, but I wouldn't favor it over Evil Swarm Nightmare. And lastly in the side is Needle Sealing. I think Needle Sealing is a decent option in this list if you have access to it and not any of the other Power 3 cards. But a little trickier to pull off since it requires 4 more monsters on the field. You, in theory, can get value off of this because you could protect your Neos Fusion monster with Neos Fusion and your rockets do float. So it's worth considering and worth maybe trying out if you have it. But I don't think it's a no-brainer, must-play, mandatory tech option. So I have it down here in the side deck. That's it. That's card by card. Let's move on to expectations. Let's talk expectations. First and foremost, do I think this is a King of Games level list? If I'm being 100% honest and truthful, I don't know. Keeping my expectations realistic, I would lean towards no. And I say that for a couple reasons. One, this is a toolbox deck. Toolbox decks are a little more difficult to play than just regular standardized decks. This is utilizing some very key one-ofs in the extra deck, and they are very niche in scope sometimes. You don't have any guaranteed ways to shut your opponent down. You have to get a read on what your opponent is playing, and then find the right toolbox monster to get into, assuming you're running it, and then flex your ability to use that toolbox monster to shut down your opponent. If you're a little less knowledgeable about the metagame or bad at making blind reads on your opponent, then this deck could be a little harder to play. In addition to that, I don't necessarily know how good Borreload Furious Dragon is. I love the card. I think it's great. I think it's fun. I think it's cool. I think it's badass looking. But at the end of the day, if the only monster you have the capability of making is Borreload Furious Dragon, I don't know how much that is going to do for you. Yes, you will still be able to pop one of your opponent's cards, but it will come at the cost of your own Furious Dragon, the boss monster that you designed your deck to build. Because of that, I'm a little nervous to say this is a King of Games level build. I definitely think this build can get into Legend Ranked, and what happens from there is probably beyond my capabilities to tell. Hopefully one of you likes this list enough, regardless of what results you're expecting, and tries it and can show it off for me. I know I definitely am going to play this deck sometime soon. I think I'm going to try and King of Games with Rokket Resonators, just because Rockets are such a good engine for Resonators, and Resonators are my favorite deck of all time. If I decide to not do that, this is definitely the deck I will be playing, and this is the deck I will try to get all the way to the finish line. There are very few things that would make me happier than to put a crown on Borreload Furious Dragon. I think one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves, though, is will this deck be fun to play? I think so. I love Borreload Furious Dragon. It's a really cool monster, has a really good effect, and I personally love toolbox decks. I love that duel in and duel out, I am constantly challenged to pick the right option and find the right win condition, sometimes taking a stab in the dark. In addition to that, toolbox decks are notoriously flexible. You can put whatever you want in the extra deck and find a good use for it. I love that flexibility. I love that versatility. I love that Necro Fusion adds to that. I love that I could potentially make Dark Cavalry off of a Necro Fusion and win the duel out of nowhere with an elbow drop that my opponent never saw coming. If you guys like this deck list and you want to see more like it, please let me know. I want to make content that you want to watch. It is the most fun to me to make something, share it to the world, and then have it be received warmly. So without your feedback, I'm just throwing darts here. So let me know. Let me know in the comments. Find me on Discord, Twitter, whatever. I'm around. You can find me if you want to. Let me know what you think. And I think that's all I have for you guys today. As always, be safe, have fun, everybody. Let's take one last look at Furious Dragon on the way out. Goodbye, buddy.